Welcome to the Hidden Corners. Tonight we are going to be reading a story sent in by one of our listeners. I want to give a big thank you to those of you that have sent us stories, and if you'd like us to read your story, you can email it to thehiddencorners.story@gmail.com. The short story tonight is The Pond Stalker by Rob Bowers. Rob is the author of a book called Campfire Tales from Uncle Rob. His books are available on Amazon, and I'll put the link in the description so you can check out his site. Rob is currently working on Volume 2 of the Campfire Tales, so be sure to watch for the release of that as well. I think it's coming out real soon. I want to thank Rob for sending this in to us, and I hope you'll enjoy the story. Please join Clay Steele as he reads The Pond Stalker.
The Pond Stalker by Rob Bowers. This event happened at a farm pond. And yes, it's a true story. You may be thinking, another story with a farm pond as a setting? All I can say is I used to spend a lot of time fishing at ponds. Back when I was younger, there were ponds everywhere, and many actually held water and had good fish in them. Today, a farm pond that holds water and has good fish in it is a special thing because so many of our ponds have gone dry due to drought. Now, farm ponds have their own finite ecosystem. Fish such as largemouth bass, crappie, channel cat, and bluegill thrived in ponds. Ponds were also a stable source of water for animals, both wild and domestic, and sometimes ponds seemed to be places where weird things happened. They were, quite literally, where things went bump in the night. Now, the pond in this story wasn't a particularly big pond, but it was fairly good sized. It held a marginal population of bass, a great crappie population, and supposedly it held a few nice channel cats. A friend of mine named Terry and I decided we would do some night fishing at the pond. We wanted to see if we could tangle with some of the big catfish that were said to inhabit the pond. We'd already seined some crawdads and water dogs for bait. A seine is a large fishing net kept hanging in the water by weights and floats. But we'd gone out to a creek and cut some tamaracks. Our plan was to set some bank lines and fish from the bank with rods and reels. Well, we arrived at the pond just before dark and proceeded to set up for the night. We selected a nice spot on the bank where we set up. The main part of the pond was in front of us and to our right, and there was a large tree out in the water in front of us, with a few smaller trees scattered around the big ones. Lines, lures, and bobbers hung from the trees like Christmas ornaments, testifying to previous fishermen's misfortune. I myself had caught a few good bass and many crappie around those trees, but on this night our focus was catfish. We thought our plan was foolproof, especially so considering the bait we had with us. So we set 5 bank lines to our left. The pond narrowed in that direction and curved around to the left. The access to the water was partially blocked by brush and patches of cattails. We could only walk about 100 yards or so. After that, the area was too choked up with brush to go further. As we walked along the pond on our right, following a slightly worn cow path, the area to our left was a tangle of brush, tamaracks, and further backs of a few medium-sized trees. There was a tall red bluff behind all that, and a few gullies and washes that cut back into the bluff. The cow trail that led back to this area was pretty well defined and meandered along the pond shore, occasionally rising up and down over small humps in the terrain. So we set our bank lines in places where the shore was open. The idea was that the fish could easily make their way up to the struggling bait in those places, so we set the lines so that the crawdads and the water dogs hung just below the surface. Any movement by the bait created little splashes and ripples. We thought this would be irresistible to any fish wanting an easy meal. And once we had our bank line set, we set up a sort of a camp. We gathered wood and built a campfire. And we made cowboy coffee and had a few cans of beans that we heated up on a flat rock. We cast out a few rods with bait right in front of us. For extra light, we had a lantern, we had a flashlight. So the night was warm, it was pleasant, the sky was clear, and there was little to no wind. We sat at our campfire, sipping coffee and talking. We talked about our plan and our setup. We were sure it was going to be a good night of fishing. Well, after a while, Terry remarked, "You know, this is the pond where that old man drowned, right?" No, I answered. I don't remember that. When did that happen? Back in the 70s, Terry informed me. I was still in high school. Well, I guess I never knew about it, I told him. I'm pretty sure that was here, said Terry. It was a sad thing and kind of weird. Weird, I asked him. How was it weird? Folks said they found him up on the bank, Terry said as he sipped his coffee. Okay, I said. What's so weird about that? He wasn't in the water. Okay, I shrugged it off. He was on the bank, Terry continued. If he drowned, why was he on the bank and not in the water? Well, maybe the wind blew him onto the shore, I was guessing. Or somebody moved him, Terry said. Well, why would anybody do that, I asked. Folks say he drowned, but he had been on the bank for a few days before he was found, Terry stated. Well, that is a bit weird, I admitted. Makes you wonder, Terry replied. I wanted to change the subject. I wonder if I should go check the bank lines. I got up and grabbed the lantern. Want me to go with you? Terry offered. Nah, you stay here and watch our rods, I told him. Maybe a big one will try to pull one in. Okay, Terry said. We'll trade off. You check the lines this time. I'll get the next turn. Deal, I agreed. Well, if you need help with the big one, Terry said as I moved down the bank. Will do. It was good and dark now, but the lantern provided a nice halo of light as I moved to our first bank line. There was no fish on it. The water dog was still alive and wiggling around. I moved to the next line. As I bent over the line and lifted the crawdad out of the water, I suddenly got an eerie feeling. The hair on my neck stood up. It felt like I was being watched. I lowered the bait back into the water and turned around. I held the lantern up high, trying to look back into the brush. I couldn't see anything. That damn story about the old man drowning on dry land had me spooked, I was thinking. I moved down the bank to the next line. I was about nearly to it when I heard a noise off to my left. I heard the brush pop. It was a sort of a rustling noise. Again, I held the lantern high and I looked back into the dark brush. I could see the tall bluff behind the brush and the trees, but I saw no movement in this tangle of brush. I continued to the next line. This time I heard a noise behind me as I checked the bait. It was a crunch, crunch, crunch. It sounded like footsteps. Had to be a raccoon, I told myself, or some other animal moving around back in the brush. The lantern light seemed feeble all of a sudden, and I wanted a better light because I could see nothing. And the crunching stopped when I turned around. What the hell? I thought to myself. I hurriedly checked the last lines. I heard the crunching noise behind and beside me in the brush every time I got to one of our lines. But I saw nothing, and we caught no fish. As I made my way back out, a passing thought occurred to me. What if Terry was messing with me? First he tells me this spooky story, then he follows me down here and he makes noises to scare me. But when I came around the small bend and topped the little rise, I had a clear view of Terry sitting at the campfire. He would have had to really hustle to get back to that point ahead of me. I walked on back to him. Terry looked up as I arrived. Anything? He asked. Nope. I shook my head. Nothing, and the bait was still on. I set the lantern down. How about you? He grinned. Look in the ice chest. He pointed at the big red and white ice chest we had with us. I opened the lid and looked inside. Inside was a nice 3-pound bass. Nice, I told him. What'd you catch him on? Your rod, he grinned again. The one with the crawdad. Cool. Well, I settled down and got a bit of coffee. I wanted to tell Terry about the noises I heard, but decided not to. I didn't want him to think I was spooked, and I still wasn't sure if he was behind the noises I heard, so I just didn't mention it. Well, a half hour or so later, Terry got up and picked up the lantern. My turn to check the bank lines, he announced. Okay, was my response. I'll watch the rods. I watched him until he disappeared around the small bend and over the rise. I wonder if we had a fish on any of the lines. I wondered if Terry was going to hear noises. While I wondered, I sat quietly and watched our rods. About 15 minutes later, I saw Terry coming back. When he got close enough, I could see he carried only the lantern. Still nothing? I asked as he set the lantern down and took a seat. Nope, he admitted, bait's still hanging. Damn, I grumbled. I sure thought we'd catch something back there. Maybe we should move the lines to another spot. We may need to, Terry said, but let's leave them for a while yet. Okay, I shrugged. Any bites on the rods, he asked me. Nope, I told him, not even a nibble. Terry just grunted, poured himself some coffee. I was watching Terry closely while pretending not to. I stared at the fire, but I watched him. I thought he looked a little bit off. He frequently looked in the direction of our bank lines. I wanted to ask him if he heard anything strange when he checked the lines, but I didn't. After a while, Terry suddenly blurted out, "You know, some folks say that old man's ghost haunts this place." I sat up straight and looked sharply at him. "Get out. Do you believe that crap?" "You don't?" he asked me. "Hell no," I said firmly. "But you're Catholic, aren't you?" he asked. "Well, yeah," I admitted. "What the hell's that have to do with anything? You know, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, isn't that a Catholic saying?" Terry asked like he explained everything. I rolled my eyes. "Dude, cut it out. I threw my cold coffee on the ground. You're killing me." Terry laughed. "Whatever, man. It's your turn to check the lines." Okay, I got up and grabbed the lantern. As I walked away, Terry called after me, "Watch out for the Holy Ghost." I just waved my middle finger at him and I walked away. I heard him chuckle. As I approached the first bank line, I was now convinced Terry was messing with me. Somehow, he was making the crunching noise I had heard. It had to be him, and I had just thought of a plan to prove it, providing I heard anything this trip. I reached the first bank line and I checked it. We had bait hanging and no fish. I heard nothing out of the ordinary. I was a bit relieved. The relief, however, was short-lived. I was halfway to the second line when I heard it. Crunch, crunch, crunch came the sound from the brush to my left. I didn't hold the lantern up to look around. Instead, I turned and sprinted back the way I'd come. I was going to catch Terry coming out of the brush. There must be another path back through the brush that he was using. I was younger and faster, and I had no doubt I could beat him back to the campfire. But when I came around the turn and up the rise, I stopped in shock, because I could clearly see Terry sitting at the campfire where I had just left him. There was simply no way he could move fast enough to get back there after making the noises I heard. Well, I was panting a bit. The sprint back and the adrenaline had me breathing hard. I retreated back down the rise just a bit. I stopped when I could just see him over the rise. I stood and I watched Terry, and I also kept a wary eye back down the bank toward our lines. I even looked to see if I could see where another path might be. I watched Terry get up and step forward to bend over one of our rods. He messed with it for a moment, probably tightening the line. Maybe it had a bite. But soon he returned to his seat. After a few more minutes, I started walking back towards Terry and the campfire. Terry put more wood on our fire, and I put the lantern down. "That didn't take long," Terry remarked. "Still nothing," I told him. Terry put another few pieces of wood on the fire and sat down. "See any holy ghosts?" he chuckled. I ignored him that time. "I'm going to check my bait," I said, and proceeded to reel up my 2 rods and check the bait. All was good, so I cast them both back out and sat back down. "Did you have any bites while I was gone?" I asked him. "Not sure," he admitted. "This one," he pointed at his rod, "had slack in the line, but I didn't see anything hit it." I nodded. That confirmed what I had observed, unbeknownst to him. Maybe I should check my bait too. I watched him while he reeled up, checked his bait, and cast it back out. After that, we just sat in silence. We watched our rods, we watched the fire, and we didn't talk. After a while, Terry stood up and stretched. "Well, this fire is making me sleepy," he said with a yawn. "I'm going to check the lines. If we don't have anything this time, we should move them." He grabbed up the lantern and walked down the bank. "Sounds good to me," I said, not knowing if he heard me. Terry was right, though. The fire was making me sleepy, too. We're out of coffee, so I got up and stretched. I walked to the edge of the firelight. I stared out at the pond, wondering where the fish were. After a few minutes, I sat back down. I saw Terry coming back. He seemed to be walking faster than normal. As he got to me in the fire, I could see he was upset. "That's it," he exclaimed. "You need to cut the shit." I looked at him. His eyes were wide and he was clearly agitated. "What?" I asked him. You heard me, he fumed. It's not funny. I don't know how you're doing it, but cut it out. It's not funny. What the hell are you talking about? I asked him, but I thought I knew. Making noise back in the brush. I started to say. It's not funny. Terry was hot. I thought it was you, I told him. Not funny, he exclaimed. You heard noises too? I asked at the same time. Wait, Terry looked at me. That wasn't you? Hell no, I admitted. You never left the fire while I walked down there? Hell no, I said again. I stayed right here. We stood looking at each other for a long moment. Then together we both looked down the bank where our bank lines were set. I think we were both thinking the same thing. What the hell? Terry turned to me. You're not lying. That wasn't you. I swear it wasn't me, I told him truthfully. I heard stuff too. I thought it was you. I figured it had to be you, especially after that talk about the guy drowning and the ghosts. Terry shook his head. I started talking that stuff because the first time I went back there I heard that shit and I thought it was you. So I thought I would creep you out so you would stop. Now I shook my head. Exactly what did you hear? I asked him. Footsteps. Back in that crap. Stuff being stepped on, he explained. What'd you hear? Same thing, I told him. Footsteps crunching around back in the brush. Maybe it's a cow, Terry said, or an ornery old bull. Maybe. But I couldn't see it. I just heard it. Tell you what, Terry offered. Let's both go check the lines. Okay, I agreed. You take the flashlight, Terry told me. I'll take the lantern. The flashlight was a weak little thing, but it was all we had beside the lantern. Together, we set off down the bank. We arrived at the first line. Terry lifted the fishing line up, and sure enough, the bait was there. Just as he dropped it back into the water, we heard it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps, back in the brush. We both stood looking, Terry holding the lantern high while I aimed the flashlight back in there. We could see nothing. No movement, no shapes, nothing. I aimed the flashlight past us down the path, and as soon as I did, the crunching came again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Were those footsteps? And if so, footsteps of what? Terry and I now both knew it wasn't the other making those noises. Why don't we pick up our lines and get out of here, I suggested. Good idea, Terry agreed. He reached down and pulled the bank pole out of the mud and rolled it up. He took the bait off the hook and tossed it into the pond. I kept scanning the brush with the flashlight. We moved down the trail to our next line. Terry pulled the pole out of the mud and started rolling it up. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sounds came to us again. I aimed the weak flashlight directly at the area I thought the sounds came from. For a moment, I thought I saw a vague shape of something. I was aware of Terry standing beside me. In the area where I thought I saw a shape, I saw what looked like two eyes. They were red. Red eyes in the dark and the shadows cast by our lights. Terry held the lantern higher. The eyes disappeared, or maybe they blinked. A few seconds later, the eyes were back. About 6 foot off the ground, and maybe 30 feet back in the brush, two red eyes looked at us. The eyes looked big. The eyes looked about 4 inches apart. What the hell is that? I asked softly. I don't know, Terry said from beside me, but it ain't no holy ghost. Let's get the hell out of here. I didn't argue with him. I didn't have to agree with him either. We both took off. We didn't run, but we walked at a brisk pace. And off to our right, in the brush, every few moments we could hear the footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Terry was in front with the lantern held high. We cleared the little rise and left the brush behind. In a few moments we were back at our dying campfire. We both turned back to where we saw the eyes. We stood looking for a moment. Let's reel up and get the hell out of here, Terry suggested. I'm for that, I agreed. We both reeled up the lines we had cast out. We kicked dirt onto the fire. I took all of our rods in hand and now had both the lantern and the flashlight. Terry carried the ice chest and our bait bucket. We climbed the slope up to where the truck was parked. We left the tailgate down. I tossed the rods in the bed. I set the lantern on the tailgate and moved to the cab and started the truck and turned the headlights on. I went back to the tailgate. Terry had set the ice chest on the tailgate and opened it. Where the hell's my fish? He asked me. It's not in there, I asked him. No. I grabbed the lantern and held it up, looking into the ice chest. That 3-pound bass was gone. Did you turn my fish loose? Terry was furious. No, why would I do that? Well, it's gone. Terry threw his hands up. Fish don't get out of ice chests and walk off on their own. I swear to you, buddy, I did not turn your fish back. The last time I saw it was when you had me look at it. The only time when one of us was not near the ice chest was when we both left the fire to check on the bank lines. So if someone or something had been out there and got the fish out of the chest, it had to be then. We both turned to look back toward the pond. Our eyes traveled to the brushy area beneath the high bluff where we heard footsteps and saw red eyes. Forget it. Terry slammed the lid on the chest shut and pushed the box into the bed. He shut the tailgate. Let's get back to town. I drove us toward the gate where we entered the pasture that held the pond. That had to be a big old bull, Terry reasoned. Do bulls' eyes glow red, I wondered aloud. By chance, as we neared the gate, we saw about a dozen cows. I swung the truck towards them and hit the high beams. Most of the steers lifted their head and looked at us. Their eyes all shined yellow. Yellow, not red. Okay, so not a bull, I reasoned. Terry didn't offer an opinion. I think he was still pissed that his fish was gone. What about our bank lines? I asked aloud. Let's come out in the morning and get them, Terry suggested. Okay, I agreed. In the daylight, Terry added. Sounds good, I agreed. I'll come by about 7. I'll be ready, Terry assured me. The next morning, I picked Terry up. We stopped and got a bite of breakfast, then headed out to the pond. I drove in and parked at the exact same spot as before. Terry raised his eyebrows at me as he watched me pull a shotgun out from behind the seat. Just in case, I shrugged and jacked a shell into the chamber and clicked safety on. Maybe we have some fish on the hooks after leaving them out here all night, Terry said hopefully. Together we walked down the slope to where our fire from the night before was. At the same time we noticed our coffee pot and our cups. In our haste to vacate the premises, we'd left them behind. Well, we'd both chuckled about that. We weren't chuckling, though, when we ventured down the bank to retrieve our bank lines. The brush beneath the high bluff on our left didn't seem nearly as foreboding as it had in the dark. We still could not see much back in there. We could see that there was water standing quite a ways back into the area. Funny that we didn't notice that last night. It was weird even. It got weirder. We did not have any fish on our hooks. All 3 of our bank lines we had left out were gone. We looked all around, but they were just gone. Someone or something had taken them. Speculation through the years that followed varied between Terry and myself. What made the footstep sounds? Were those red eyes really eyes? And if they were eyes, what was it? What happened to Terry's fish? What happened to our bank lines? Our speculation always started with rational explanations. Oh, it was an animal back in the brush. It was a deer. It was an owl in a tree. It was a raccoon or a possum in a tree. Did it have anything to do with the old man that drowned? Was the place haunted? Maybe someone, some guy or guys had been messing with us. They took the fish and the bank lines. Maybe some fellow happened upon the bank lines the same morning before we arrived back and took them. We wondered if maybe they had big fish on them. Maybe rational explanations were not the answer. Maybe the answer lay with the irrational. Or maybe, just maybe, something that stalked us in the brush was the culprit. Something that was really big and had big red eyes.